The contents of this interview, or from Awake and Empowered Expo LLC from Ethann Fox and Flower of Life Center for Human Evolution, is for informational purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the viewpoints held by these organizations or individuals. Always consult with your doctor or health professional before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or prescription drug use. Please understand that you assume all responsibility and risk for the use or misuse of this information.
Welcome to Awake and Empowered Radio. This is Ethann Fox, and I'm here with Jeffery Jaxen. This exclusive interview with Dr. Gerald Pollack took place on April 28, 2014. Dr. Pollack is a professor at the University of Washington and an author and researcher in the fascinating field of water. During our conversation, we discussed the characteristics of what he calls easy water. In further discussion, we speculated on the impact of easy water on health, the work of Viktor Schauberger, and other interesting topics. Dr. Pollock, welcome to our call. We have some questions for you today. But first, before we get too far into the questions about water, I'd like to know a little about your life history, what led you to the study of water, and in particular, any life-changing experiences that might have influenced you on a personal level.
Well, that's actually quite a menu of possible items. Okay, so water. Why the interest in water? You know, I started my career as in engineering, and I still kind of enjoy nuts and bolts and putting things together to make them work. But in terms of research at the University of Washington, I studied muscles and for many years and trying to figure out the molecular mechanism of how the proteins inside the muscle interact with one another to produce the force and the motion that muscles can produce. And we did a lot of experiments and a lot of really interesting results. However, we came to realize after 3 decades of research that the major component of muscle was not the muscle proteins that all of the investigators talk about, but the water. You know, if you look at any textbook, for example, if you just look in Wikipedia to find out muscles, and they'll have beautiful diagrams of all the different muscle proteins that do all kinds of dances in order to make the muscle contract. And it looks as though the muscle proteins are operating in a vacuum. There's no water in any of those models. It came to us that, well, you know, water, we're 2/3 water. It's a lot of water to just ignore. In fact, if you consider the number of water molecules that make up this 2/3 fraction, since those molecules are really small compared to all the other molecules in your body, there's a lot of them. And if you count, it turns out that more than 99% of your molecules are water molecules, and that applies to the muscle as well. So how could it be that we're approaching the idea of how muscles work and ignoring 99% of the relevant molecules? It's weird, you know, but that's the way it is. And so we began to get interested in water. One particular scientist had a great influence. He's now 95 years old, Gilbert Ling. And Gilbert professed for many years, since he came, just a few years after he came from China, just after World War II, that something is wrong, that we consider water inside the body, particularly inside the cell, as being just ordinary water molecules, like molecules in a glass of water. He said that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And he mustered the evidence to demonstrate that the water inside the cell was actually ordered in some way. It's not hard to imagine that because the cell is so densely filled with large molecules. It's so densely filled that there's actually very little space for water. The average distance between those large molecules is something like the equivalent of 7 water molecules. That's not much. It means that every water molecule in the cell is right near some charged surface, some macromolecular surface. And everybody knows that these surfaces influence water in some way. They order them. So So it's not a giant leap to think that the water inside the cell is actually ordered and organized. So I read some of Gilbert Ling's books, and they made sense to me. I gave them to my students, to my postdocs, and every one of them said, this guy has something important to say. And that's how we got started. My first book on water, that is Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life, I wrote it because I wanted to popularize the ideas of Gilbert Ling. I thought, his writing is oriented mainly toward physical chemists rather than toward your average scientist or in fact, lay person. And I tried to write a book that clarified and maybe simplified a bit some of Ling's ideas. And it turned out after writing a bit that I think I was able to do that, but I was able to maybe go beyond and thinking more about the exact role of this ordered water inside the cell. And the book was published. It was controversial. I suggested that some dearly held concepts in cell biology might actually be dead wrong. It has infuriated many of my colleagues, but mainly it emphasized how important water was, not only in muscle, but in every cell of your body. And the idea was that the cells contained most of the water in the cells was this ordered water, and that in order to do what the cell is designed to do, for example, a muscle cell to contract, or a secretory cell to secrete, or a dividing cell to divide, the water was central to all of those operations, and it involved a transition from this ordered kind of water to ordinary water, like water in a glass. That transition was so important for driving each and every one of those processes. So that was the so-called Cells and Gels book. But beyond that, a year later, we came upon an experimental model that allowed us to explore the properties of this kind of ordered or so-called structured water. And we started, and we managed to get some money to pursue these studies. And these studies wound up saying so much about the nature of this water and so much about the centrality of this kind of water, not only for biology, but for all of nature. And that came out in the book, just a recent book, which is called The Fourth Phase of Water. And it really does seem to be a fourth phase of water, because we all know the three phases. We know that there's solid and liquid and vapor. But the idea of another phase, somewhere in between solid and liquid, kind of like gel-like, highly viscous water, was predicted actually more than a century ago. And many people in the early part of the last century knew that there was something really interesting about water that hadn't yet been touched. And people who know a bit about water know that water is a strange and seemingly anomalous liquid, just full of paradoxes. And if there are anomalies in water, what that really means in layman's language is that, well, we don't know what's going on. Something is wrong because we can't explain everything using information about those three phases. And so we found a fourth phase, and this phase is described in that book that I mentioned. So I guess that's the history that you asked for. Happy to embellish or expand as you wish, but that's a thumbnail.
Yeah, Gerald, Dr. Pollock, one part I wanted to also ask before we really jump into the intricate parts of the water is the cells, gels, and engines of life and fourth phase of water. There is about 12 years between those books, and I know I follow a lot of your work, and you've been a trailblazer and pioneer in a lot of fields when it comes to water and its effects on the body and life. How has the scientific community's resistance to change changed in that time? Have you, at least from your view?
It's a complicated question, because we think of scientists as being creative and open-minded, and of course many of them are. But the truth is that the scientific community is a rather conservative community, The people in the community are often unwilling to entertain ideas that run seriously against the mainstream. It just doesn't. Not only does it feel strange and awkward to entertain a concept that's radically different from what you've grown up to believe, but also, the problem is that it impacts your career. So for example, if I propose that if I propose to a flat Earth community that the Earth is actually round, it's not so easy for people to countenance such a radical point of view, no matter how right it might be. And the reason is that the flat Earth people have built careers around the flatness of the Earth, and they've become the world's experts. And if the New York Times wants to interview somebody about the shape of the Earth, they're going to go to the flat Earth people, of course. And we all have egos, and we don't like to relinquish our vaunted positions in scientific society. And that leads to a problem, because we're all reluctant to give up our cherished ideas in favor of a radical idea. So we all know that it's happened since Galileo, and even well before that. And it happens this century or last century to so many people who have dared to challenge science. Well, okay. So that said, the question that you asked is, 12 years between two books, what's happened? I think, first of all, let me say that there are mixed opinions about the content of both books. If you read the reviews for example, on Amazon, you'll find some of the most glorious reviews that you could imagine. And you'll also find dissenters who usually write a paragraph or two saying how awful all this stuff is, and how speculative, and how it goes against what everybody believes and such. So, however, water is different. What I found is that a lot of people are interested in water. Now, there's a community of scientists who call themselves water scientists, and some of them are doing really interesting work, and most of their work is oriented toward computer simulation of water molecules. You can take 100 or 200 water molecules and see what happens to them over time under certain conditions, and often it takes a supercomputer a week or two to do those computations. That's how intensive they are. And that group of people, they often believe that these simulations contain the correct answer, and therefore some experimental work that seems to be out of accord with their computations of their computer water are not easily accepted. On the other hand, water is interesting from everybody, from atmospheric scientists to oceanographers to people in fisheries, to geologists, and of course throughout biomedical science and such. So it's all over the place, and these people really cherish some of these new findings. I'm totally flabbergasted by the response. As I said, of course, there's mixed response, but I get communications from new people I've never heard of at the rate of 10, 12 a week, who want to know more, ask me to answer certain questions. It's actually really difficult to keep up with all of this, and I get numerous invitations to be a plenary speaker or keynote speaker at meetings ranging from neuroscience, neural therapy to nanotechnology, and a lot of medically oriented people, especially alternative medicine, because they realize that some of their long-held approaches to health rest on water in one way or another. So their enthusiasm seems boundless. So, yeah, I guess to summarize, the people who don't feel threatened by some of these results, and I should also include some physical chemists who feel really uneasy with the idea of long-range ordering of any molecules, because it just doesn't seem right to them. despite some of those communities, the response has been just overwhelming. And as I said, I think the reason is because they don't feel any threat. They feel only new insights, new knowledge that is helpful for them in understanding how nature works.
Now, you speak about the fourth phase of water and how it has a higher viscosity, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And also it contains more energy?
It contains charge, right?
Charge.
And essentially is energy, right?
I'm wondering, because we've interviewed a number of other people from different backgrounds and areas of expertise, is there any relationship to what's referred to as ormus? Have you ever heard of that? Because I've seen it described in a similar way.
I've heard of ormus, and I also there's the work of Wilhelm Reich also that talks about a different kind of energy, and I suspect that all of these energies are actually one. Nature's got one way of working, and the question is, well, how is it? And I think that it's possible that people who have discovered and labeled these kinds of energies are pretty much approaching the same central core, but in a different way and with different measurements. So I can't comment more on ormus because I really don't know a whole lot about it.
There is a conventionally held wisdom that you have to drink 8 glasses of water per day, right? And I'm wondering, what's your opinion on that?
Okay. I don't know if 8 glasses is the magical number, or 10 glasses, or 6 glasses, but water is critical. I think a lot of people have come to realize that we're dehydrated. Many of us are dehydrated. So as we get older, we get wrinkles, and the wrinkles are a reflection of dehydration, of progressive dehydration. So when babies are born, they're, I think, roughly 80 or 85% water, and as we age, we have a smaller and smaller fraction of water. And when you get to be my age, you're probably that's 115. That's you probably something like perhaps 60% water. So we have less and less water, and the question is, well, gee, that part's a fact, but how much water do we really need to function? And I like to refer to a wonderful book by a guy who shall be labeled Batman. His name is Batman's blah, 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 blah. And it's an Iranian name, and I can never remember. It's got a few J's in it, a few I's. It's a long name, but the book is called You're Not Sick, You're Thirsty. I met Batman's son by chance, sitting next to me in a plane, when the flight attendant asked for my name and his name, and he said, just call me Batman. I knew who he was. So he was telling me about his father's book that sold over 1 million copies on Amazon. And the book describes the role of water in health. Batman Sr. Was a supporter of the Shah of Iran, and he was thrown into jail when the Shah was deposed. So he's a political prisoner. And as such, he, as a medical doctor, it came upon him to take care of the other prisoners. And of course, he didn't have too many drugs or antibiotics, whatever, at his disposal, but he had water. So he told them to drink water. It turned out that so many of these people were cured of whatever pathology or illness they had just by drinking a lot of water. In the book, which describes those experiences and also his medical experiences after having been released from prison, it makes a compelling case that a lot of things can be cured just by drinking lots of water. Now, so how, and each chapter describes a particular illness, like it was a chapter on diabetes and a chapter on heart disease and one on cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So your question is, well, gee, what's the magic number? Is it 8 glasses per day, or is it more or less? And as I said, I can't really answer that one, but I can say that from Batman's work, that it's clear that the water is really, really important. And I organize the annual conference on the physics, on the chemistry and biology of water. And we have many people who come and many people who approach me. Also, I happen to be editor of the research journal called Water. So a lot of people come to me, and I've come upon some people who produce different types of water. Now, ordinarily, we think of drinking tap water, and as you know, tap water contains a lot of junk in it that we always try to get rid of. But these people are producing waters that are treated in certain ways. Each one is different. Each one has a different process, and some of the people reveal the process, some don't, whatever. I've come to know that some of these waters, having seen the direct evidence for this, some of these waters really work, and some of them even can reverse pathologies. And so, for example, a colleague of mine is producing a kind of a water that, and I saw the hospital records, and a colleague interviewed these patients, so I'm confident about the results, that these people who had irreversible kidney pathologies, the pathology is reversed after drinking the water for a number of weeks, and there are some remarkable changes. And there are others that claim the same. I haven't seen all the evidence, but from the evidence I've seen, I'm convinced, first of all, that you need to drink a fair amount of water, and secondly, that some waters may be better for your health than other waters. I wish I could say which ones exactly are the best. We would love to be able to do a comprehensive study, since we have no financial interest in any of these waters, so we could do an objective, scientifically based study to figure out which ones are the best ones for people's health. I think this will be critically important for humanity. We tried to get some support in several attempts from the National Institutes of Health, but as you know, that most of the research that goes on in medicine tends to be genomic or drug oriented and such, and the idea that water could be like the magic pill, so to speak, is actually rather foreign to many of those people, and so it's really difficult to get funding. If we could we need probably several $1 million, and to do a comprehensive study, if we could get that, we would be able to do the studies that are needed to tell the world which waters are the right waters to drink, and perhaps how much.
Dr. Pollock, from your evidence, would you say that vitamins and antioxidants and the like would be more of a secondary, and if the right water was to be found or is found, that would be a first line of defense for maintaining health and even reversing a lot of pathologies such as liver pathologies or perhaps even cancers?
I think it's quite possible. You have to understand that what the antioxidants really do, and I need to back up a step and talk about cells. Cells are negatively charged. Everybody, any physiologist can tell you that if you stick an electrode into a cell, you'll get a negative electrical potential. And so why are they negatively charged? And without going into a long story, the textbook view is related to membranes and some membrane pumping and such, and I think that's not the answer. My Cells and Gels book describes why. I think the right answer, since we discovered that the water, this interfacial water, we call it EZ water, exclusion zone water, structured water, they're all pretty much the same. We discovered the water has negative charge. Now, if you go back to remembering that 99% of the molecules inside the cell are water molecules, and most of them are EZ water molecules, that's where the negative charge comes from. And so so we're going to get to oxidants or antioxidants in a moment. So that negative charge is really critical for function. If it comes from this interfacial water. Now, if you don't have enough of the water, the proteins can't function as well as they should, and your cell is sick or pathological. There's a lot of evidence for this in the literature, but nobody really understands the reason why. And that's the reason why getting more water into the cell, or more easy water, will improve function and improve health. That's the same as adding more negative charge to the cell. Negative charge is really critical for proper function. The cells that have the highest negativity will function best. For example, cancer cells, instead of negative 80 or 90 millivolts, are only minus 30 millivolts, and pathological kidney cells, 20 or 30 millivolts. It's similar with many cells. The more negative it is, the better the function of the cell. And in fact, we actually, a student just measured the electrical potential of people, you see, and every chemist will say that, oh, people are neutral, but in fact, they're not neutral. We have many measurements. And so as a colleague of mine in Japan, measuring the electrical potential between you and the ground, and you're negative. And in fact, we have some preliminary evidence that shows that the healthier you are, the more negative you are. For example, this is a very small value of n, where n is the number of samples. A student was of mine were making measurements on her colleagues in the dormitory, and they all measured negatively, and one of them was very negative, and she told me, she interviewed the person, and it turned out this person was running 3 times a week and was absolutely physically fit. And there was another outlier that was only barely negative, and that person had walking pneumonia. So we're studying this, but I think it's going to be pretty clear that the more negative you are with your cells and your body, for that matter, the healthier you are. So now I get back to your question about antioxidants. So it gets back to the chemistry. What's an oxidant? What's oxidation? What's reduction? Well, oxidation is the loss of negativity. Reduction is the gain of negativity. So oxidation is the loss of negativity. Now, you don't want to lose your negativity, because that's like losing the easy water and losing function. You want to maintain as much negativity as possible. So an antioxidant does exactly that. It doesn't permit this loss of negativity, you see, and that's why the antioxidants actually work. It all boils down to what happens inside the cell and how negative the cell is. So it really, you say antioxidant is a secondary backup. Perhaps secondary, perhaps primary. The most important feature, and you can get that with antioxidants, and you can get that by drinking the right kind of water. The most important is to build up that negativity inside your cell, because that negativity is absolutely essential for function.
That's an amazing explanation. Thank you. One of the other things I was also curious about to hear from you. So the easy water, you stated, it splits into positive and negative charge molecules. From my research, there's another camp of water researchers that say it's micro and macro water as far as the molecules and the clusters, and having it in smaller clusters makes it easier to get through the ion channels and get into your cells. Are those parking the cars in the same garage, or are those two different views?
I think they're parking the cars in the same garage. So that's a good way of putting it. So what does clusters mean? Well, easy water is essentially a cluster, but it's a very large cluster. We're not talking about 50 molecules or 100 molecules. We're talking about gazillions of molecules stuck together in one entity, which we call, we should call it probably liquid crystalline water, or maybe macro clustered water. I don't know. We could never think of the right name. We originally called it easy or exclusion zone because this kind of water excluded everything from it. It's like ice. And actually, I think the structure is not too different from ice. That's described in the latest book. So anyway, we gave it the name exclusion zone or easy, and that name seems to have stuck. And so we decided to go with it. The most prominent proponent of clusters, he calls them coherent domains, is the late Emilio del Giudice. And Emilio unfortunately died a few weeks ago. He was just a wonderful soul, and for 30 years he's been espousing the idea that in the presence of external energy from the environment, that water can organize into, instead of clusters, he calls them coherent domains. And those coherent domains are on the order of 1 micrometer or so. That would contain, I think, 10 to the 10th huge number of water molecules. So I'm not sure that micro is the right word. But, before he died, he prepared a paper with another dear colleague, Vladimir Vyatkov, sometimes pronounced Voykov, from Moscow University. And they wrote a paper together describing how, in fact, the coherent domains and the easy water are really much the same, and one morphs into the other. And the easy is nothing more than a bunch of coherent domains stuck together. So I think parking the cars in the same garage is the way it's going to go. I think clustering is a really interesting idea. Many people talk about it, and I think clusters of clusters form exclusion zones. I just might add one remark is that I didn't mention before, is that, it takes energy to order something. It's like, your room gets dirty and it requires pretty much no energy to get it all messed up. But it takes energy to clean it and organize it back into its neat and tidy form. And it is a well-known thermodynamic principle that if you want to order something, you need to put energy into it. And so it turns out that not only the coherent domains, but the same for the easy water. You need energy. It's the energy from the environment absorbed by the water that creates this zone of negative charge. The energy, and it's mostly in the infrared, and infrared energy is all around us. You can't get rid of it. If you were to darken a room and take an infrared camera, you'd get a wonderful image of everything, because everything is emitting infrared energy, and the water absorbs this energy greatly, and it turns this energy into other kinds of energy. We've demonstrated that you can get flow energy. Things move around because of this inside the water. And also, you mentioned the charge. Actually, this zone, the exclusion zone, negatively charged, and the water beyond that is positively charged. And the reason is that you start with the water molecule receives the energy, the molecule splits into negative and positive, and the negative parts gather together to form this exclusion zone, and the positive charges are floating around in the ordinary bulk water beyond the exclusion zone. So you have plus and minus separated. It's just like a battery. In fact, we've demonstrated that if you put one electrode into the minus and one electrode into the plus, you can get appreciable electrical energy out of that. And that's I think, remarkable. So the water is actually, you might say, an engine or a transducer. The fuel is external radiant energy, light, if you will, particularly infrared light, infrared radiant energy. And the output is, you can get not only electrical output, but also mechanical output from it. Also optical, because this water tends to act to fluoresce. So if you put one wavelength in, you get another wavelength out. So water is a transducer or an energy. It doesn't just sit there. It absorbs energy all the time and converts that energy into different kinds of energy. And that's what's really remarkable.
Can I have some clarifying questions first, just to make sure that I understand correctly? First of all, tap water is H2O, correct?
It's H2O plus a lot of junk.
Right.
Yeah, and plus some minerals and ions, yes.
Mm-hmm. And water such as glacial water, spring water, or fresh juice is H3O2.
I think it's partly H3O2. H3O2 is, of course, this EZ water that we're talking about. It's not 100% H3O2. I think nothing is, because it's got negative charge, and it's hard to get a glass of negative charge. So you'd have some EZ water that is suspended in H2O, right?
So what's the dynamic? What happens in the human body when you consume a glass of tap water? How does that convert into H3O2 or easy water?
That's a good question. Okay, so the first is, when you drink the water, obviously it goes through your system, and it's absorbed by your tissues. Your tissues are basically, that means the cells. Okay, it's absorbed by the cells, and so if you, as it's absorbed by the cells, first you think that it just sort of oozes into the cells, and I think that to some extent that's true, but I think it's actually pulled in, because the cell is negatively charged, and the water is just ordinary H2O, is a dipole, plus at one end, minus at the other end. And so if you have think of a bean with a positive charge at one end, a negative charge at the other end. If the cell is negative, that bean will reorient, so the plus end is closer to the negative cell, and it basically gets sucked in that way. And now, if you have a larger dipole, more pluses and more minuses separated, it'll be pulled in faster. You see, so for that reason, I think that's why the EZ water probably gets pulled in faster. This needs to be studied, but at least from a theoretical point of view, it should hydrate better, because it's a massive dipole. The pluses and the minuses are massively separated, and so it should get sucked in rapidly. But even if it's an ordinary water molecule that gets sucked in, that water molecule will quickly get transitioned into EZ water. And the reason is that our body keeps absorbing energy from outside. Our body is mostly water, right? 99% water. Water absorbs light, particularly infrared light. So we receive energy like that all the time. And a question is, well, do we just radiate that energy back out again, or do we use that energy kind of in the same way that plants use that energy? Now, if you were Mother Nature, and you had developed the photosynthesis for not only green plants, but bacteria and other microorganisms, it works really great, and you decide to invent animals and humans, would you just discard that wonderful mechanism that uses energy from the environment, or would you exploit it? I guess I would exploit it. And there's good evidence that we might actually exploit that energy. So one way of exploiting it is in answering your question, that the water inside the cell, receiving that energy from outside, converts that water into EZ water. You see, so you're back again with your proper hydration because of this kind of energy from outside. I remind you that infrared not only comes from outside, but we kind of tend to relate infrared energy to heat, and there's a lot of metabolism going on inside your body that produces heat. So there are plenty of sources of the infrared energy that's needed for building this kind of water. So to summarize, you said you drink the water, what happens to it? Well, the water gets into your cell, then the water is converted into EZ water, and the cell is functioning well again. I think that's how hydration helps you. Yeah, I'd like to amplify just a bit on the issue of how we might use infrared energy. And one of the ways that we've been thinking of using this kind of energy that we absorb all the time is in the circulation. I started my career studying heart muscle and how the heart and the cardiovascular system work, and I thought we knew pretty much everything there was basically to know, at least about the mechanics of the system. And then one day, one of my Russian colleagues told me that there's something that's really, really wrong with everybody's understanding of the system. If you go down to the capillaries, which is essentially where all the oxygen exchange occurs. These capillaries are pretty small. Typically, in a young, healthy adult, they can be down to 3 or 4 micrometers, whereas the red cells that have to pass through these 3 or 4 micrometer capillaries are 6 or 7 micrometers. So it's like, stuffing a soccer ball down a tube that's thinner than the diameter of the soccer ball. Even if you deflate it some, it's still hard to push through. It requires a lot of energy to push this through. So if you go back now to the capillaries and think about the energy that's required to push those red blood cells through. And by the way, it's well known that they bend and contort as they go through. Otherwise, they just simply can't get through. So the Russians calculated that the resistance of these vessels to flow is so high that if the heart were fully responsible, the heart would need to develop approximately 1 million times the pressure it actually develops. See, so this is a problem. Even if they're off by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude, still this is a big problem. Somehow the heart can't do it, and some extra energy is necessary. So one idea is, what about the light that's absorbed? Is it possible that this energy is somehow converted into the mechanical energy that pushes the red blood cells through? Well, I wouldn't be suggesting so radical an idea if we hadn't seen it in the lab. In the lab, we take a tube, just like the capillary, we put it in water, and voila, the water flows through the tube, just like flowing through a straw. There's no pressure driving it, nothing. It's just a tube made of hydrophilic material, just sitting in the water, and we've demonstrated this with many different materials. Automatically, flow goes through the tube. One day it'll go from left to right, the other day right to left. We can't predict ahead of time, but there's flow. Now, usually you need pressure to drive flow through any kind of pipe. There's no pressure here. However, the water is absorbing energy from the environment. It's absorbing light. And we now know that this light gets transitioned into a kind of mechanical energy that drives the flow. In fact, if we add extra light, we've gotten flow up to 5 times the ordinary flow. So this is a really powerful thing. And it's possible that the same effect that we see in the laboratory in driving the flow through these tubes occurs in the capillaries of your body. So I hope that's answered. That's a long answer to a short question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, let me address something you just said, which you talked about, well, you didn't, maybe not in this session, but I've heard you talk about how what causes easy water to become easy water is the pressure in the ground that produces spring water and so on. But why is it then that the tap water doesn't contain more easy water since it is pressurized in pipes?
We don't know how much easy water is contained in the water that you drink. There is a measure of it. It's a kind of a light absorption at a particular wavelength, I'm stumpling because I actually don't know the answer to your good question. First is we don't know how much easy water is contained in tap water. Tap water is different depending on where the tap is. It can be grossly different. If you obtain spring water from deep down, I mean really, really deep sources, this is under enormous pressure. And this spring water, I've seen samples from different people, contain a lot of easy water because it absorbs at that critical wavelength. When you drive water around big pipes, my understanding of the amount of pressure is that it's much less than is required to than the water, the deep spring water feels, because we're talking about huge amounts of water and earth on top that are pressing down on this water. And it's been pressing down for a long time. Time is another issue because these waters are, I wouldn't call them primary waters that actually occur more deeply, but for eons, these have been under pressure. And they also contain a lot of minerals, and the mineral is basically something that's dissolved in the water, like a salt or something. And around these salt molecules are easy water. So if you combine that with the pressure, huge pressure, then you can understand why the spring waters will a lot of easy water. The same with glacial melt. You know, the glaciers are high and heavy, and they exert a lot of pressure on the water below. So we know experimentally, when we apply pressure to water, it shifts the equilibrium from bulk water to easy water. And another point about the tap water that we drink is that, you know, there are some things that disturb the easy water, that break up the easy water. I haven't got a list of all those because we don't know all of those. We do know some of them. And depending what contaminants are found in the tap water, I could also understand that these contaminants could conceivably work against the structuring or buildup of easy water.
So let's say you take spring water and you bottle it and sell it at a store. Does that easy water convert back to H2O in a short amount of time, or does it maintain its integrity?
Not clear. It needs to be tested. However, I can tell you that someone sent me a sample of water. I mentioned the water that can reverse kidney pathology. And we were busy, and it sat in my office on my desk for 3 months. And after 3 months sitting in a glass container, we put it in the spectrometer to see if it absorbed light at the wavelength that we expected to find for easy water. And there was a very clear absorption at that wavelength after having sat on my desk for 3 months. So it's not clear, and it probably depends on the kind of container, and it probably depends on the kind of radiant energy that's passing through from the environment into the water as to whether it's maintained or not maintained. It's really important to study this because if these waters are as good for health as I believe they may be, then the longevity of this is important to test.
So how does boiling water affect it? Does that change the quality of the water at all?
It seems that when you boil the water, you mess up the structure, and you can imagine why that would happen. You know, the molecules are getting tossed around. But what happens after, when the boiling water it cools, that's another matter that remains to be seen. Is not clear yet. That also needs to be tested. Sorry to respond to a bunch of your questions with a "we don't know," but the truth is we don't know.
That's okay. That's okay. I probably have a lot more questions like that for you too.
I might have answers to some of them.
Okay, good. Well,
not everything that we know appears in the book, and we've learned a lot since, even in the 1 year since the book was published.
Let's say that you were to take a bottle of distilled water, which is more or less free from impurities, and I assume that at that point it's primarily H2O, correct? Am I on the right track?
I think it's primarily H2O, although there's a caveat. You know, it depends on the container. So some glasses, some glass containers will nucleate the structuring of water. You know, if the glass is sufficiently hydrophilic, water loving, and if energy is coming through at the right wavelengths, then you still could get some and even appreciable ordering of water. So you know, in general, in pure distilled water should have none. It should be pure H2O, but that's the ideal case.
Okay, so let's say we have pure H2O in distilled water. And so from my understanding, it would be less hydrating than an equal amount of spring water. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
All right, so let's say that we were to take that gallon of distilled water and we were to sit in an infrared sauna and drink that water while in that sauna. Would it be equal or more hydrating than drinking an equal amount of easy water not in the sauna?
I think so. That's a quantitative question, and you know, I could guess at an answer, but I don't know if it's correct or not. But it's a good question, and it brings to the sauna. You know, why why do you feel good if you've been in a sauna for 30 minutes? And somehow we think that, oh, okay, the heat is somehow stimulating. Maybe it improves our blood flow, and it probably does. But there's more to it. The sauna contains a lot of infrared energy, and infrared energy builds easy water. And so if you've got a muscle ache or a headache, or you're feeling depressed or what have you, you go into the sauna 30 minutes later and you feel like $1,000,000. And I think the reason is that whichever of your cells have been responsible for the deficit that you're feeling at the moment, that's reversed by this kind of energy. This kind of energy works its way in, and the cells, it could be your brain cells or your muscle cells or your whatever cells, are deficient in easy water. And the energy, the radiant energy from the sauna, builds up that water back to its normal state. So at least for a while, you feel wonderful when you get out. And it's difficult to answer quantitatively your question, but I think saunas are great, and I highly advocate them.
Dr. Pollock, I would like to switch gears to the topic of Fukushima and the contamination of water over there. Have you had any experience with that, or has your lab dealt with any of that water and trying to mitigate the radiation in it?
In Seattle, the day has 24 hours. And I have some people who do want to collaborate on this, and to determine, because the easy water, if you have isotopes of the water, like deuterium oxide or so, tritium, they may not form EZs to the same extent that H2O does. And some people are thinking that they could use that principle to help mitigate that disaster. So that's for the future, although it's really urgent, I understand. I do hope some people seriously tackle that problem, because it's obviously a devastating issue that needs to be addressed.
So speaking to the days of the week in Seattle and not only having 24 hours a day, I saw you did a Kickstarter, and I was curious for the audience listening if there is a way that we could help you moving forward. I'm not sure if you have a Kickstarter currently, or if there's any ways that we could get involved.
Thanks for that question. It's a wonderful question, and it's actually it wasn't Kickstarter. It was Indiegogo, and it brought some help, and now it's finished. And the help was very modest compared to what we expected. These platforms are generally designed for people who have gadget, and if you donate some money, you're going to get one of these gadgets free or something like this. And we have no gadgets to offer. We offered only a free copy of the book that I wrote, and it's not nearly enough. The work that we're doing on water and understanding water, and particularly understanding the absolutely central and critical role of water in health, which is known to our ancestors but totally forgotten in our modern age, it desperately needs support from agencies. So if any of your listeners are connected with someone of some means who would like to make a donation to something that could have world impact, please connect them to us. We'd be very happy to hear from them. I think what we could produce at the end of 3 or 4 years, and we actually need a few $1 million to do it properly. We could produce a list at the end of what water you can drink to be best for your health, depending on if you have a cancer issue, if you have a kidney issue or liver issue. We would know and recommend which water can help you. And as I said, I've seen evidence that some of these waters are actually pathology reversing. It would be a revolution in medicine, a revolution in health. I really deeply believe that.
Yes, it's interesting that, like you said, it goes back to, it challenges some beliefs and some dogmas, but it's interesting that not many medical establishments, communities, colleges would want to jump on board too much with that. It's a shame that doesn't get more traction, but I know there's people out there that, heck, there's 2 people on my in my neighborhood that are just referred to dialysis for kidney dialysis, and I know if that's a representative in any way of the greater population, I know that's a big issue these days, and obviously cancer. It seems like it would be a good investment for a lot of people, especially with that kind of turnaround. No, 2 to 3 years, my gosh.
Totally, absolutely true. Yeah, I've seen some results on cancer as well. Melanoma, for example, reversal of melanoma. And as I said, it's not just one group, it's several groups who claim evidence. But, if there's a financial incentive, some people might claim anything. It needs to be studied objectively by a group that has no investment in any of those waters and that understands the science behind it. I think that we could be the one and perhaps produce something really important for humanity.
Well, piggybacking off that, since you have mentioned that a couple of times, and I know all your work is very open, the terminology that's been thrown around lately is something called open sourcing. And would you be open to something such as an open sourcing of this research in a way where it would be a month, perhaps this is just an idea, but a month by month situation where other labs could follow in your footsteps if you were leading. So if you had the funding and you did some of this research and said, okay, this is the test we just did for reversing the pathology of a liver situation, and if a lab at the University of Michigan would like to replicate this, here's the steps, and it would be closed for only certain types of colleges or professors or people that study with water. Would that be something that you could do, or would it be a closed research throughout?
Well, anybody could study anything. They don't need our permission to do so. In fact, the studies that we have planned, we're not experts in tumor biology, but we actually have collaborations planned with 4 different groups at the University of Washington, extremely experienced in studying kidney pathology, tumor pathology, using mice, rats, and other kinds of experimental models, and also in humans. And we don't anticipate doing all of that ourselves because we're not experts in that, but these people are enthusiastic about collaborating. They're lined up, ready to go if we can get the money. And beyond that, of course, we would tend to publish in open journals everything that we find, and anybody who wants to attempt to replicate or extend or whatever, it would be most welcome to do that. This should be done by many laboratories around the world, and I think that many of them will do it if we take the leads to be done in a comprehensive way. A single study showing efficacy of a certain water simply doesn't get traction. There are many of those papers out there already, but few people know about them because they're scattered and isolated. What's necessary is to have a critical mass. And I think we have enough interaction with the world that we can begin to create that critical mass if we can get the initial funding to carry out those studies.
Are there any dietary or lifestyle choices that are adverse to production of easy water in the body?
Are averse to, did you say?
Yeah, that would go counter to, that would prevent or slow down or inhibit the production of easy water in the body.
Oh.
I'm always asking you these hard questions, right?
You're making me think. Well, I mean, certainly drinking water that contains chemicals that you don't know about and whose effects are really unclear can't be good for you. If we drink the chemical remnants of what pharmaceutical companies produce, this is not so good. I know that some groups claim that fluoridation of water has adverse effects and have evidence that one group in Ecuador, I was just recently there presenting, showed me the evidence that had to do with thyroxine and reduction of thyroxine, the fluoridation. The problem is that fluoride and chlorine too interferes with the iodine production that's necessary for the thyroid. They just replace it. They're similar on the periodic table, and they simply replace it. And then many people become hypothyroid, and they kind of lose their energy as a result of that. The same person told me that two of the greats in science knew about that and actually took iodine on a daily basis. They were Linus Pauling, the exceptional Nobel chemist, and Albert St. Georgi, who was the father of modern biochemistry. So that's another area that needs some more study, but the evidence that I've seen is highly suggestive. So we want the purest possible water containing natural minerals that seems to work well. So I think the types of water that we drink may be critical to our health. Beyond that, everybody knows that exercise is good, and I don't have anything particular to say about that. And adequate hydration is certainly important. If you don't drink enough, you're destined to be sick. Many are prone to becoming sick. I think a lot will emerge in the future about some of these. Once the world understands how critically important the water is, 99% of our molecules, you can't ignore 99% of the molecules, how critically important that is for our health.
I understand that a lot of the questions I'm asking are kind of theoretical because you haven't had the chance to do as much research as you'd like, and so these next ones are going to be no exception. But you talk about how our body, we get rid of positive charge through perspiration and through urine and so on. Well, if that's the case, do you have a theory about the ancient Indian practice of drinking urine that's in more recent times? They've done a lot of research both in the United States and abroad and found that there are a lot of benefits to it. Any thoughts on that at all?
You ask really hard questions. I guess I really don't have any thoughts on that. I can't answer that one. I don't know of a possible reason. I could imagine that the positive charge gets evaporated into the air or gets drawn out, and that there's something in the urine that could be worthwhile. But I'm not familiar with the details of that. Interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. No problem. I understand. I'm sure you're familiar with Viktor Schauberger's work, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Now, he talked about how certain shapes enhance the energy of water, such as an egg-shaped container. And actually, I have an 11-gallon egg-shaped container that I had shipped here from Australia from a company that makes these ceramic containers for water. And so my question is, and he talks about how that's why eggs are shaped the way that they are and why seeds have an egg shape. Does your research point to the same theories as far as the shape of containers and somehow enhancing or maybe even converting H2O into easy water?
We haven't studied that aspect of Schauberger's work. Schauberger was a genius. He brought so many interesting features and understandings of water. And that 11-gallon tank, I've seen some research demonstrating the results of that. It's just incredible that you put this egg-shaped device in the center of in a garden somewhere, and within a radius of 10 feet or so, the vegetables grow much more rapidly than beyond the reach of it. It's just incredible to see it. So something is really going on there, and perhaps Schauberger was wiser than we are in understanding how exactly it works. His writings are not easy to understand, not only because they were written in German, but some of us can't read German. But Schauberger was not a scientist. He was a naturalist, and his terminology is different from what we use in science. And so some of his concepts are not so easy to understand. A possibility is that the egg shape that the motions of water that occur inside the egg shape have a certain pattern that's conducive for building easy water. People haven't studied that, but they have studied vortices. Schauberger was really big on the vortices that occur. So if you look at a river, and as the river wends its way down, you can see these swirls or vortices that occur around turns and around rocks. And Schauberger referred to this as living water, whereas distilled water just sitting around is dead water, referring back to a question that you asked. So my guess is that what happens inside the egg shape is that the water circulates in some natural way that produces these vortices, and these vortices probably produce easy water. And I think this could be a reason. Now, you might then ask the follow-up question of, why is it that this egg-shaped device has such a powerful effect over a radius of 10 or 20 feet? And this presumably has something to do with the radiant energy that's coming out of the water that's inside this egg-shaped device. And there are a lot of experiments now that do address that. The issue of energy being absorbed, generated and absorbed also by water. This seems to contain information. And, the most dramatic of experiments at our annual meeting, which takes place in Bulgaria this year about the conference on physics, chemistry, and biology of water, we have usually a number of such presentations. And the one that is perhaps most dramatic was given by Luc Montagnier, who you may know won the Nobel Prize a few years ago for his earlier discovery or identification of HIV. And Luc turned to studying water because he knew that water was so incredibly important for biology. And what he did in his experiment is, just to make it really short, is he put DNA with a known sequence in a flask, closed flask, sealed. And next to it, he put some water, also in a closed flask, sealed. Those two were sitting near each other for a period of a day. Okay, and then take away the DNA, it's not relevant anymore. But the water, he says that this water has received information from the water that contained the DNA. It contains all the necessary features for making new DNA of the same sequence. So then he takes the water, and he adds the water to the dry chemicals that are used, the building blocks of DNA, and he pours the water in and finds that the DNA that's produced indeed has the same sequence as the DNA that water was standing next to. This is really dramatic, and apparently a number of groups have been able to reproduce the experiments, and so information seems to come from water. And as I said, there are a dozen such experiments of different ilk that have been produced over the past dozen or so years that move in the same direction, suggesting that the radiant energy that comes from water has information, and that information can impact the water that's absorbing the radiant energy with the information. So this is a completely new realm, and my guess is that in Schauberger's egg, the reason that the crops have improved the way they are is that the information they're getting is information that's conducive to growth. It's absorbed by the water in those plants, and that's the reason why it works as well as it does.
Do you think that the egg shape only has that effect? You said it affects crops about 20 feet away if the egg shape contains water, or will the egg shape itself have that effect?
I don't know if the egg shape has that effect. Is that your experience, that it does have that effect?
Well, I don't actually know. I do have a garden right outside where I have the container, and I used to have it full of water all the time. For the past year, I have not, and I can't say, well, the garden's always grown well, but I can't really say for sure. I've never done any real experiment in any scientific controlled way to be able to say.
I see. I would guess that the water is critical, although you certainly have depending on the material, you can have water that is absorbed on the surface of the container, depending on what the container is made of. That's another possibility. Also, I can't recall. I can't recall whether Schauberger put only water or added some material inside of that, maybe some compost or something like that. I know in the biodynamic farming technique, perhaps you know about that. You know about everything. So, Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, that's similar, well, philosophically similar way. You add just a few drops of some compost in the water and swirl it around for 30 minutes in one direction, and then swirl it around for 30 minutes in the opposite direction, and then pour it on the crops at particular times during the month, and the results are stunning. Where no fertilizer is necessary. I know some grape growers in California have been using this technique without any fertilizer and producing wonderful crops. So I don't know if this is the same dynamic that's occurring, but it's possible that, again, that there's some information that is stored in the molecular arrangement of the water molecules, and that information is then absorbed at some distance. Of course, this all sounds mystical, and it sounds like some kind of charlatanism. On the other hand, I've seen serious scientists working on this, many of them first-rate people who demonstrate using sound physical principles and techniques that something is going on there. And as I said, this is the next frontier.
Yeah, I am actually familiar with Rudolf Steiner and biodynamics. So, and to answer your question from earlier, the egg actually is, this particular egg is designed based specifically on Schauberger's research, and it's made from a porous ceramic, so it actually breathes, and it produces a vortex down the middle of the egg. And so the outer shell is cold because it's breathing and perspiring, and the inner part of the egg is warmer, and so there's a water vortex that's created as a result of that difference in temperature. So getting back to the memory of water that you mentioned a minute ago, do you think that easy water, let's say you take, obviously if you live in a city, you are getting tap water that it has, you might say, contains DNA and memory from all the people who drank that water and everywhere that water's been, so it contains an immense amount of information that may or may not be beneficial to your health, even beyond the whatever minerals or health-giving properties of the water. So no telling what that effect is at this point, right?
Correct.
And so does converting tap water, which is primarily H2O, into easy water, do you think that may get rid of that memory?
Yeah, well, yes and no, because the logical residence of the memory is the easy water. If we think of bulk water, the molecules are arranged helter-skelter, and at least according to current understanding, which is not that well developed, surprisingly, is we don't really understand about bulk water, but what appears to be the case is that it's rather disordered and not ordered. And if it's disordered, it's not likely that it's the repository of memory, because the molecules are moving around all the time. There's no long-range structural order. But easy water is completely different. It's like a crystal. And crystals can store information based on the crystalline arrangement. So you can convert from one crystalline arrangement to another crystalline arrangement, and the kind of information that's stored, the kind of vibrational information that you get out of the crystal, will be different. So crystals can store energy and information, and possibly the information, the so-called bad information that you may get, may actually be stored in some minute amounts of easy water that are contained within the bulk water. That's conjecture at the moment. It's beyond anything that anybody knows, but it follows logic. There are ways that some people have claimed to be able to rid the water of any previous memory. Some of those methods are privileged communications. I don't know them, but the information is not released to the public. But people selling some kinds of waters claim that they first rid the water of any previous information. There are certainly ways to do it. It's like erasing your hard drive, getting the information off, and then the fresh information can be put in without contamination from the old information. It makes sense that can be done, but how exactly that's done is not so clear.
So theoretically, it may be a good thing that tap water does not contain as much easy water because, at least in major cities, right? Because it's not going to contain as much memory.
Well, yeah, I guess it's not great to have bad memories, better to have good memory. So we want to rid ourselves of the memory of nightmares.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm referring specifically to, well, if you're in a city, you're going to have the memory of everywhere that water's been, versus if you're drinking water from a spring, for example, whatever that memory is, if it even has any, it's not going to be adverse to your health or well-being.
I would think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I have another. This is a very theoretical question, and but I'm just curious of your thoughts about it. There are a lot of theories that human beings used to live for hundreds or even thousands of years, and some of those theories point to the possibility that there was once a mist of water that used to surround the Earth that might have been responsible for the extended lifespans. Do you have any theories based on anything relating to how water might have been different in ancient times that could have resulted in extended lifespans? And to add to that, answer that question, and then I'll get to the next part.
Wow. I have no theories, but a colleague of mine has been exploring the origins of water, and she's talking about black holes and the fact that water is seen now on the sun and water is seen on many planets. It seems to be all over. So water may be even more ubiquitous than we think, and therefore even more ancient than we think. But the idea of the mist of water, that's beyond anything that I would care to speculate about. I don't know about it. So no information, no speculation.
Sure, no problem. I understand. I wasn't expecting, I was really more looking for your opinion or any thoughts or feelings you had on that, since it's hard to know how that varied. So my follow-up to that may be theoretical as well. Is there some way that we could create an effect today with the water that we have that could potentially extend lifespan?
That's an interesting question, I think the answer, of course, is not known. But my sense is that if we could extend lifespan, the answer would lie in hydration. Remember, we lose water as we age, and we found in some studies, it's not just us but other people, that all the ordered water inside the cell, when you die, the ordering is changed to ordinary H2O. All of your ordered water and nice crystalline arrangement of proteins, it all disappears, and gradually you become dust. And if you could maintain the ordering of water and the quantity of water, is possible that cells and you can persist longer. And there are a bunch of ways to do that. We talked about drinking a lot of water. It's possible that it needs to be studied. It's possible that drinking the right kind of water for a longer duration could have a life-extending effect. There are also other things that you can do that build this water, besides going to saunas and being out in the sun to build this water. Also, earthing, connecting yourself, grounding yourself to the earth. So everybody knows that you walk on the beach and barefoot and you feel pretty good when you do that. And some of us remember as kids getting buried in the sand and not wanting to become unburied because it feels pretty good to be buried in the sand, hopefully with your head sticking out, but it's very nice. And all of these are basically connecting to the earth in some way. And so the question is, well, gee, what physical good could there possibly be in connecting to the earth? And the answer is a lot, because the earth is negatively charged. This is unknown to so many people, and it was unknown to me until 5 or 6 years ago when my Russian colleague, a man at that time in his 60s, told me, just as he was about to leave my laboratory in Seattle to go home to Russia, he was telling me about the Earth's negative charge. And I said, "You're crazy. This is nonsense." He said, "You're crazy that you don't know about it." And I said, "Well, I never heard of such a thing." He said, when he was in middle school in Moscow, every one of his colleagues knew that the Earth was negatively charged. Well, he left, and the next day, one of my students brought to me a copy of Feynman's lectures, the legendary Feynman lectures used by most graduate students in physics today. In Volume 2, Chapter 9, describe all the evidence, abundant evidence, that the Earth had negative charge. And I think it does. And so if you connect yourself to this abundant source of negative charge, this charge will flow into your body. And if it flows into your body, the negative charge will build easy water, because easy water has negative charge. So, and we found experimentally that in a chamber, you just add electrons, add negative charge, and it builds easy water from ordinary water. We published a couple of papers on this. So health-wise, connecting yourself to the earth, walking barefoot, for example, or sticking, driving a metal post down 2 or 3 feet and connecting your feet or hands or whatever to this, or even sleeping with it, could have real health advantages, and maybe some of these approaches, maybe we'll find a Methuselah one day who can live hundreds of years. That remains to be seen. It's natural, it's simple, and it could be effective.
I actually do sleep on a sheet that's grounded to a grounding rod in the backyard. So
you sleep better?
I don't know. I never slept bad to begin with, so I can't really say.
I think I've met some people. I met a physician, a very intelligent woman, at a meeting, and she was telling me she had chronic sleep problems, and she tried this, and it was an amazing transition from chronic sleep problems to sleeping well every night. Now, I don't know how many people have had that experience, but there are a lot of studies that show health benefits of earthing.
Yeah, I've spoken to people who have noticed benefits from doing that. I personally have been in pretty good health to begin with, so I haven't noticed any major change from having it. I more try to maintain optimal health than try to fix anything. So now, do you have a theory on you talked in one of your lectures about easy water and clouds and so on. How do you think chemtrails and geoengineering are affecting our clouds?
I can't I can't answer that question, but I can say that anything you put into the air is unlikely to be in the interest of good health. That's as far as I can say about that. Nature is amazing. Nature has optimized its domain for our life, and any kind of tampering with this, unless you know that the tampering is in a positive direction and you have clear evidence, I'd always be worried about that.
In Viktor Schauberger's work, I believe he pioneered the idea of transporting logs by floating them on water, right?
Right.
And so what exactly is happening there? Is that a layer of easy water at the top that's suspending the logs, or is it something else that's causing the logs to travel in that way?
Well, he found that that if he, instead of transporting the logs in a straight course, that if he designed the course so that it resembled a river, then the logs would go without any problem. And um, I don't think anybody has really analyzed exactly what's going on, except that Schauberger always talked about vortices. And when you have these curves, you do generate vortices. And when you have vortices, we think, the evidence is not clear, we think that creates easy water. And so it's possible that that you've got, let's say, a lining of easy water that acts as a kind of lubricant. If you can imagine easy water against the rails, and then beyond the easy water are a lot of protons. Remember, I mentioned the separation of charge. You have a lot of protons just inside that. So in other words, you start with the rail, then you have easy water, then you have protons. Those protons repel each other, and they should repel the log, and so they should keep the log from hitting the sides of the chute. And this principle, I think, is used widely for low friction. I think it's what causes low friction on the top of ice. And I think it may also cause low friction in our joints. I describe how this works in my recent book. Your knees, you can do deep knee bends and it doesn't squeak. There's not a whole lot of friction. And the question is why you're bearing all this weight and the two surfaces don't necessarily rub on each other. And I think the reason is that in between these two surfaces are huge numbers of protons generated as a result of easy water, and these protons repel each other and it's like magnetic levitation, except that it's protons pushing apart the two surfaces and not allowing them to touch each other.
So where do you see your research going from here in terms of your work with water?
I think the book that I wrote, I think, lays out many of the basic principles of water. There's a lot more to be done, and we're doing it. I think what has been really important is the role of water in health, and that has come to the fore in the last year or two, in realizing how much import this has for the future of humanity. So that's part of where we're going. Also, I found in doing this that many of the things that we've come to understand, we don't really understand as well as we like to think. And I think one of the reasons, I'm talking about basic physics and chemistry, one of the reasons is that we tend to attribute to different causes what actually is the result of charge, the simple element of plus charge and minus charge. We don't come to appreciate how important and how powerful those charges are. I've come to realize how important those charges are, and I've begun drafting my next book. And the next book deals with phenomena in basic physics that we don't really understand very well. For example, gravitation, magnetism, why the Earth spins on its axis endlessly, why it revolves around the sun endlessly, how birds really fly, and I think it's different from what we think. I see eagles out of my home every day, just gliding along for many, many minutes without even flapping their wings, and we like to attribute these things to secondary phenomena like rising air currents or temperature gradients and stuff like that. And I think there are more fundamental explanations. So in the future, I hope in the next year or two, my next book will be out that describes a reinterpretation of those phenomena, even the structure of the atom, which I believe is not correct. It's led to many difficulties in interpretation of physics. So that's another direction that we're heading in the future.
Where can our listeners find you or learn more about your work?
Well, I think the book is the first place. It's available on actually a good site is Ebner and Sons, EBNERANDSONS.com, because the new ebook is out. It's cheap, easy to get. And I think it's quite a nice book. It's received some very nice reviews. That's one place. There's a TED Talk that summarizes in 20 minutes or so many of the basic features. If you look under Gerald Pollack, TEDx, I think you can get it easily. Our website, our laboratory website, whose URL is too long for me to give it, but if you Google under Gerald Pollack, University of Washington, it's easy to find. I think those are probably the best places.
Great. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And for taking all those really hard questions.
Yeah,
so we'll see you real soon.